The new Zelda Tears of the Kingdom came out recently, and I've been playing a little bit of it. And I saw the fast travel effect. I thought it was kind of cool, so I figured I would take a look at how we can recreate that inside Houdini. So this project file will be available on Patreon if you're interested in taking a look at all the settings that I have. You can go through node by node and look at what I did. Let's go ahead and just recreate this effect. So let's drop down a geometry node, dive in there, and let's create the rubber toy. With this, I don't need the shader, so we'll just disable that. And I want it to sit on the floor here, so we drop down a match size node and set that to min. Then I want to just keyframe this because I want it to kind of go upwards. So we'll start at like frame 15, we'll set a keyframe there, come to frame, I don't know, 55, somewhere around there. And we'll set this to a value of 1, set our keyframe, and I don't want this sort of easing in and then easing out. So let's come to our animation editor, let's select this first keyframe, come down to this little arrow, and we'll just go ease out. And this way it'll start off fast and then kind of slow itself down here. This gives us this sort of an animation, which is kind of more what I'm looking for. So let's drop down our PopNet and start to create the particles kind of coming off of this. So let's dive in here. Let's disable the guides here. And I don't want the particles to be spawning from the start and kind of following along here. I just want them to spawn kind of in the middle of this as it starts to move and then kind of stop after a little bit here. So let's come into this source and let's come to the birth and let's type in a little phrase here into the constant activation. So we want it to start after frame like 25, so we'll do $FF is greater than 25. And then we also want it to stop after a little bit. So let's have it stop at around frame 55. So we'll do ampersand, 2 ampersands or and signs. And we'll do $FF is less than 55. And let's also turn down this constant birth rate here. And now we can press play, and we see we have some particles that are spawning. And they only spawn between frames 25 and 55. So now we need these particles to kind of move upwards with the geometry. So let's drop down a pop wind node. Oops. So wire that in. And then in this pop wind node, we need to change a few things. This is kind of not going to do anything from the start. So we need to give it some wind velocity. So something like 3 will give us some upward velocity to our particles. But we also want them to kind of swirl around a little bit. So we need to come into this noise and give it some noise. So let's do like a value somewhere around 3-ish. And then we don't want it to be so rough. I'll just kind of bring that down. So you can play around with that setting and see what it does. And then we can just give it a random kind of offset. Something weird will work, whatever. And let's press play and let's see what this gives us. So now we have our particles kind of spawning and then swirling about and going up kind of off out of the camera, which is more in line with what we're looking for. And we can also just change the life expectancy down to like 3 or something, just so that they die at some point and they don't go on for forever. Doesn't really matter too much because there's just not that many particles and they're going to be going off camera anyways. So we need to come into this PopNet and actually create the trails. We can do that really easy with a trail node. And we'll set the trail length to like 20, and that gives us a decent sized trail, but we need to connect those to make them a strand. So we'll drop down an add node and come to the polygons tab, go to by group and set this to by attribute. And each one of these particles, they initially spawn and they're given an ID attribute, and these are all kind of the same, so they'll follow along if we just put it in the ID attribute. And you see that we get our trails, which is what we're looking for. Now we can really see, if I press play, that the particles spawn and they go up and just kind of slither their way off screen, which is kind of what I'm looking for. So let's drop down a merge node here, and let's view our flippy object with the particles. And you can see there is one thing here that I don't really like, and that's that these particles are spawning below. They're spawning kind of on frame 25, right? And then Flippy's continuing to move up. So they're also moving up, but they're kind of moving through him, which I don't really like the look of. So I'm going to take the final location of our Flippy object here. So we'll create a match size. We'll come to a value of 1. So that's what its final location is. I'm going to delete that channel. And I'm going to kind of Boolean out those particles below where our Flippy object is. So I can take that. I can drop down a modify normals node, which is a node that I created. So if you don't have this, it's available on my Patreon, but we're just going to set the normal direction. If I take a look at this, we're going to set the normal direction downwards. We're going to create a little cutout here and basically just flatten Flippy down here. You can do that with a grid, and you'll see why here just in a moment, why I'm looking to kind of flatten him out. Drop down a grid and array, and by default this is going to use the project rays based on their normals. So if I take a look at that, it just flattens down Flippy to be a little pancake. And then I can take a poly extrude and I can crank up the distance here and we get something like this. Let's make sure that it is with the final location of our Flippy here. So we want to go a little bit further than that on the distance. So maybe like there. Yeah, that should work. And then with this, it is kind of a mess of geometry. So let's convert it to a VDB. So VDB from polygons. We'll drop down the voxel size quite a bit. So 008 should work. And then we'll convert that back to polygons, convert VDB to polygons. And we're just going to use this as a bounding object inside of a group node. So we'll wire that into the second input and our particles into the first. Take a look at that. We want to disable the base group. We want to set this to points and come to bounding regions. Set that to a bounding object. And that will take our second input there. Now you can see that everything kind of below our object is being selected with those points. We can drop down a blast node and make sure that this is just set the points just to make sure that it gets rid of them. To come to our group 1, and now everything below would be in our kind of a path of where our Flippy has traveled is going to get deleted. I take a look at that, you can see what's getting deleted and what is not. So everything below is getting deleted, which is more in line with what I'm looking for. So if I take a look here, press play. Sorry, if I actually view our merge node, and let's get rid of the template there. You can see we have particles kind of spawning and they're traveling off the Flippy object here, which is kind of what we're looking for. That is kind of the basics of this effect, but where the real magic kind of comes into the materials. So I want to cover the materials real quick here. So we are doing this inside Redshift. So let's take a look at the particles first. Go to like this frame. So I just have a standard material setup with nothing really changed. I think it changed the roughness originally. That doesn't really matter too much, but I came to the emission, I set it to this color, this whatever that number is, and then the weight set to a value of 10, so it kind of glows. And I set up a max on noise set to the gaseous. I animated it a little bit to give it some movement, because if you look at our actual particles on if you look at the reference, they actually kind of have a little bit of breakup inside of these strands. They're not just fully connected. And honestly, if I were to do it again, I probably would crank up this speed just a little bit more. But I cranked up the scale to 10 and then played around with the high and the low clip just to give it some kind of crunchiness and get the look that I was going for. And then with our Flippy here, if we jump over here, this is more of a complex material, I guess, if you want to kind of call it that. So all this is a couple of materials being blended together with this texture sampler. This is just using the actual texture that Flippy has. If you don't know how to get that, if I come into, actually we can do it in here. If I come into our test geometry rubber toy, I can right click and go down to type properties. And with that type properties, we can come to this extra files tab and select whatever thing that we want and click save as file. That will give us the actual file. So let's actually take a look here at the final look. with our particles and everything. Let's come to a decent frame. Something like that should work. And let's bring up our redshift render view. And this is what we get. So if I take a look at our material, if I just preview that, you can see that's just the shader with this flippy material. And then if I come to our standard material, our second standard material, all this is essentially the same thing. All I've done is changed the roughness. I've changed the color here. This is important to get the kind of color that you're looking for. And then in the emission, I've changed the color to this and the weight to a value of 5. And if you're interested in the color I set up here too, I guess it's whatever that is. Now, the big thing here is this max on noise. This is kind of where a lot of the magic happens. And if you take a look here, it has this exclamation point. If we take a look at that, it says cannot have channels which depend on time, because I have this keyframed. Now, the key to this, if you try to animate anything inside of the material builder, it's not really going to work. You're going to have to promote the parameters outside of the material builder. So we can middle click on whatever and go to promote parameter. But the problem with that is the values that I'm trying to animate are the brightness and the low clip. If I look here, there are no brightness and low clip. So if I come out of this, I come to our flippy material, I come to the settings, we can click edit parameter interface, and I can add those in myself. So I added in the brightness and the low clip. They're just floats, and then I animated them actually in here. And you can see, and all I did in here was just copied the parameter, came in here and pasted the relative references into the low clip and the brightness. And you can see that if I scrub through here, kind of how these are animating. So from value of 1 in the brightness down to 0, and then the low clip starts to come in, because the brightness is going to reveal this kind of effect where it is it's kind of breaking up the opacity, because we're plugging into the opacity. And then I bring up the low clip to fade it to black. Now that doesn't take it all the way, because if I set this all the way to a value of 1, it doesn't kind of get rid of everything. So you have to bring the brightness all the way down as well. And together that gives you this kind of fading out effect, which is pretty cool. And if you're wondering how that I actually get this to update as I'm scrolling through with the IPR, you can come into your go to your redshift drop, come all the way over to this IPR setting and scroll down and click this live SOP level updates. That will allow you to just scrub through your timeline and have it update inside the IPR without you having to refresh it, which I don't know why is not set by default, but it is what it is. And then the last thing that I did was just promoted this blend color, and then I animated that from 0 to 1. So it starts off, if I stop previewing that, starts off being set at 0, and then as Flippy starts to go upwards, it's going to start to go to a value of 1. So it's starting off at black, and then it's going up towards white to make the second material visible completely. So that's how I recreated this effect inside Redshift and Houdini. Really not too complicated, but it's kind of a cool little effect, and I liked the look of it, so I figured I'd take a look at how to recreate it. Not too difficult, but gives a nice little look. So like I said, this project file will be available on Patreon. If you are interested in grabbing it, you can go through every setting that I used, setting by setting and node by node, and see what I did. And like I said, that's available on Patreon. But I do cover a bunch of other stuff on Houdini on my channel, so if you're interested in learning more about Houdini, you can go ahead and check those things out. I also cover different render engine stuff, so Redshift, I've done some stuff on Karma as well, so if you're interested in any of that, make sure to check out those videos. But anyways, thank you guys for watching, and have a good day.